All right, so enough of the conceptual stuff, enough talking about theory. It's time to roll our sleeves up and actually create some table relationships. Now, there are two ways, or at least two ways, that we can do it. The first way, which I find the easiest, is simply to click and drag relationships in the data model diagram view. So what you're going to do is select the foreign key from a data table, click and drag your mouse to the matching primary key in the related lookup table. And then once you release your mouse, it's going to create that relationship for you. Little tip here, try to get in the habit of dragging relationships from the data table to the lookup tables. It actually doesn't matter in Power Pivot, but there are other tools where it does. So it's kind of just a good habit to get in. And then a caveat at the bottom of the slide, if you're using Excel 2010 with a plugin or 2013, you may see some slight variations in your diagram view. For instance, I think that the arrows in the relationships may be flipped in the opposite direction in 2013, but don't worry, just keep in mind there are going to be those types of differences in what you're seeing compared to what I'm showing on my screen. So that's option one, super easy. Option two is to use the Create Relationship button in the Design tab in the data model, and that opens up a box like this where you actually select your tables and the related columns. So the benefit of this one is that you can actually see little previews of the values in each table that you're relating. So without further ado, let's jump into our data model and actually build some relationships. Okay, so here I am in the Food Mart data model, right here in the diagram view of my data model. Don't worry if yours looks a little bit different. Sometimes you can click and drag and move things around, and that's okay. One thing I noticed is that this poor little region lookup out here has kind of been orphaned off to the side. So I'm just going to drag that into the same view. And now let's go ahead and try creating a relationship just by simply clicking and dragging. So here's our data table, transactions. Let's start with transaction date right at the top. And that's going to be joined to calendar lookup based on the date field. So we've got our primary key in the calendar lookup, our foreign key in the transaction table. So there you go. We've just created our first relationship. Congratulations. Now tell me that wasn't easier than writing a VLOOKUP function to do the same thing. Not to mention the fact that there were no formulas involved. This doesn't take up any space in the workbook. It doesn't require much processing power. Super easy way to do some really powerful things. So hopefully you're as excited about this as I am, because this is really cool stuff. So that was the first demo, just the really easy drag and drop version. For the second one, we can go into design and say, let's create a relationship. This time, let's create the relationship between transactions and let's do customers, the first one. And what do you know? Excel knew that the matching field between these tables is customer ID. I didn't even have to click it. It just identified that this created a match with a primary key in the lookup table and a foreign key here in the transaction table, and it selected them for me. So good to go. I can press OK. And there you go. I've got my second connection created. And let's go ahead and continue on. Note that we've got a field here called stock date. Don't worry about that one quite yet. I'm going to use that to demonstrate the concept of active versus inactive relationships in just a minute. We'll move on to product ID. Boom, connect that to the product lookup. Customer ID is already connected. Store ID connects to the store ID lookup. And now you might be wondering, well, what do we do about this region lookup? The primary key here is called region ID. And if you're getting familiar with our transaction table, you may have already realized that we don't have a region ID here. So what do we do? Do we delete the region lookup table? Do we erase the whole file and just give up? No, of course not. Let's jump back to our slides and I'll show you exactly how we're going to deal with this. So here we are, connecting lookups to lookups. Let's say you've got a situation like this. Look familiar? It should, because it's exactly what we're dealing with our model. The issue here is that the transactions table can connect to store lookup using that store ID marked in orange, but it has no means of connecting directly to the region lookup because there's no region ID marked in red. But the thing is, we can connect transactions to the store lookup, and then in the store lookup, we have a region ID to connect that to the region lookup table, meaning that we've essentially connected transactions with region lookup through these chained relationships. So by doing this, any filter context all the way up at the region lookup is going to flow all the way down the chain and impact the values in the transactions table. So a quick pro tip here, models that have multiple related lookup tables like this, or chains of lookup tables, are often called snowflake schemas. And models with single tables for each lookup or dimension, like we have in all of our other cases, those are called star schemas. So with that, let's jump back to our model and actually put this into practice. Okay, so back in the data model, let's just create some room here and drag store lookup down. And just to make it visually clear, I'm going to put region lookup on top of store. Remember, region ID in the region lookup table is our primary key. And in fact, if we jump to the home tab and go back to data view, I'm just going to prove that to you. Looking at the region lookup tab here where we can actually see the data, and you'll note as you scroll down that region ID is a sequential unique list of values, so it qualifies as a primary key. So back to diagram view, let's take region ID from store, connect that up to region ID in the region lookup table. That creates this chained relationship, and now we've essentially connected region lookup with transactions. And now looking at this, we've got a pretty nice, fully connected data model. And as we'll start to see as you continue in the course, by creating these relationships and creating this model, we can now access any of these fields in any of these tables and relate them to our transactions data to do some really, really cool analyses. So stay tuned, it only gets better from here.